Do you know your IQ, your intelligence quotient? Some of us would just as soon not know our IQ. But do you know your HQ, your hospitality quotient? Growing up in a Methodist parsonage located beside the church my daddy served had its disadvantages, but it also had its advantages, and it taught me some lessons at an early age. There was a steady stream of beggars and transients and hobos who would come knocking on our front door and asking for something to eat. And my mother always fed them. She'd invite them to have a seat on the porch, and then she'd go to the kitchen and open the refrigerator, and she would take out leftovers. Some fried chicken and some vegetables would be heated up and served on a china plate. Or she'd fix a bowl of homemade vegetable beef soup and some homemade cornbread and serve that to them. And when they finished eating, she would pick up those plates and take them to the sink, and she would put water on the stove to boil. I remember saying, "Mama, why do you feed those people?" And she'd say, "Because, son, we may be feeding Jesus." And I'd say, "Well, if we're feeding Jesus, how come you're pouring boiling hot water over Jesus' plates?" And she'd say, "Because it may not be Jesus, and he may have a disease." You know what you call that? You call that covering all the bases. And it was also a way of teaching about hospitality. Jesus was doing that in our text. You heard what he said. "And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, because he's my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward." The biblical world placed great importance on hospitality. The stranger was to be welcomed as an honored guest. You know, we think that Southern hospitality is something exceptional. But if you travel to some other places in this world, you'll find a kind of hospitality that puts ours to shame. Have you ever been to South Korea? When you go into a home in South Korea, the custom is to do what first? That's exactly right. You take your shoes off, and then you bow to the host, and you exchange a greeting. You say, "Haseyo," hello. And then these people who did not know me from Adam's house cat placed a gift in my hand. I wanted to refuse it, but I'd been told that to do so was to insult the host. You see, they know that kind of hospitality that is proclaimed in the Bible and that Jesus stressed, using a cup of cold water. Now, do you understand the importance of that cold water? In that day and that place, water was difficult to obtain. Usually it was the women who had to carry it, and they carried water twice a day, sometimes over a distance of several miles. There was no refrigeration. So cold water was something special. And if you've ever been parched, dry, thirsty, then you understand why cup of cold water would be so valued. Notice to whom that gift, that cup of hospitality is offered. He said, whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, because he is my disciple. Jesus wasn't just talking about giving it to his disciples. He was talking about the vulnerable, the weak, the needy, those whom we might be prone to overlook. Jesus was always trying to help us to see that it's not about us. You see, this is what differentiates hospitality from entertainment. If we're not careful, entertainment can say, come, look at my fine house. Look at all of the stuff that I have. Notice how lovely my table is. And this food that has taken hours, if not days, to prepare. Emily Post is dead and gone, but her influence lives on. In the 12th edition of her book on etiquette, she writes, "The requisites for a perfect formal dinner party are congenial guests, competent servants, food that is perfectly prepared, and a lovely table setting." And then she goes on to say, silly people should never be placed anywhere near learned people, nor the dull near the clever. Unless, of course, the dull one is a pretty young woman, and the clever one a man with an appreciation for beauty and a love of talking. Well, there's a difference. You see, hospitality says, forget the seating chart. Forget trying to make a good impression. Come just as you are, whomever you are, and be treated as an equal. Relax and be who you are. This kind of hospitality that Jesus calls for is radical hospitality. He said we're to offer the cup of water, the cup of hospitality to anyone, especially those whom others would overlook. What do you know about that word hospitality? It has the same root word as two other words, hospital and hospice. You probably know a hospital is a place of healing. Do you think maybe Jesus longs for this to be a place of healing? And hospice is a place where people go to prepare to die. Is it too big a stretch to think of this church as a place where members and visitors and people in the community can come who are dying to feel connected to something or someone, dying to feel accepted, dying because they feel lonely and don't have family or friends, dying because of feelings of sadness or guilt or grief. And Jesus calls us to reach out to them. Now, I would not presume to guess how God hardwired you, gifted you to do that, but I am absolutely certain that He's done that because I've seen it in some of you. About 2 or 3 months ago, a man showed up here on Sunday morning for the 8:30 worship service. And then during the Sunday school hour, he and I sat down to talk. He was hungry and diabetic, and he was hurting because his mother had just died that morning, and he had come to this church off of the street. When I said, "When was the last time you ate?" He said, "Last night about 6 o'clock. And I went to the little kitchenette off of the office to try and find something to feed him. And I was rummaging around in there when Nancy Williford came around the corner. She comes every Sunday morning and checks the supply of homemade vegetable beef soup that she makes for Pastor Sarah and me to take to people who are sick and shut in. And Nancy came around the corner and she said, "Preacher, what are you doing in there? You're supposed to be in your study preparing to preach." And that's just the way she said it. I started to explain, and she started shaking her head, and she said, "Oh, for goodness sakes, you get in there. I'll take care of this man." She served him a mug of piping hot soup. We gave him an orange. And then she sat down and visited with that man, ministered to him. What was it she said? "I can't preach, and I can't teach a Sunday school class, and they sure don't want me singing in the choir, but I can sure cook." Or how about the man in this church family who has battled with depression? He knows all about that. And he happened to know that another person in this church was fighting the same battle. And I watched them after the benediction from one of our services. They walked down the sidewalk. They didn't go in separate directions. They did not head to a Sunday school class. They took a walk, side by side, brother ministering to brother. I've watched you feed and talk to and listen to and visit with those who are hurting. Leo Tolstoy told about a shoemaker who was out walking, and he came across a man who was shivering and cold, and he took him home with him. And the shoemaker was kind, but his wife was not pleased. She kept complaining about having another mouth to feed and how this was an interruption. And every time she complained, that visitor grew smaller and smaller and smaller and more ugly and wrinkled. But when she spoke kind words, guess what? The visitor grew larger and more beautiful. The reason? The visitor was an angel who had assumed human form and could only live in the presence of kindness and love. Now, does that sound preposterous to you? Remember, the writer of Hebrews tells us to be kind to strangers because in so doing we may entertain angels without even being aware of it. We can make a huge difference. Remember that Jesus spoke these words in the context of a call to commitment. He said, "Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." And then he brings that kind of commitment to a very practical level by answering the question, not just what we're to do, offer a cup of water, a cup of hospitality, not just to whom, to those we might be prone to overlook. He answers the big question. Why? Why do this? Because of the way God has treated us. Because of what we've received. Are you a Christian? Are you? Are you? Boy, that sounded weak. Let me try again. Are you a Christian? Yes. There, that's better. If you're a Christian, I think I know what you would say if I ask you, when did you most vividly, most powerfully feel hospitality? I bet you would say from Christ at a cross. Remember what Paul said, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And having been offered that gift, that kind of hospitality, he waits to see what we'll do. A preacher named Ray Osborne told about a woman who attended his inner city church in Dayton, Ohio. Her name was Pauline. Pauline came from a housing project near the church. She was what some would have considered damaged goods. She frequently smelled of urine and sweat. And some people probably didn't want her there, but she was there and she could not be missed because, for one thing, she spoke very loudly. And she always wore the same overcoat and the same knit cap pulled down over her hair. And there were those who didn't want to sit near her, but the leaders of that church were glad that she was there. In fact, the lay leaders said she was Christ's gift to us. She was a reminder of the kind of people that Christ reached out to and calls us to reach out to. Oh, she tried their patience. At the fellowship time, when they had coffee and cookies, she would start stuffing the pockets of her overcoat with cookies. And when one of the ladies, knowing that Pauline was obese and diabetic, decided to bring some fresh fruit for her, Pauline would not even hear to it. No fruit, thank you. She wanted the cookies. She was always asking to lead the singing or to sing a song, and they always responded by saying, yeah, that would be nice sometime. But 2 or 3 times a year, they would give in and let her sing, and it was always the same song. She didn't have the best voice, but no one doubted her heart. My Jesus, I love thee. I know thou art mine. And when she would get to that second stanza, she would belt out, I love thee because thou hast first loved me. And they remembered. They remembered that was their story too. And it's your story and mine. Once we were strangers who have been received. And having been received, now he waits to see if we'll welcome a stranger. Offer a cup of cold water. What do you say? Will we?